Hey, welcome back to Wheels and Things. I am, of course, out driving my Fiat 500 Abarth. Beautiful, partly cloudy afternoon in the Pacific Northwest. Today I figured we'd talk about the Fiat 500, specifically Fiat 500 in North America, and a little bit about the engine that powers the Fiat 500 Abarth in particular. Very similar engine powers the normal Fiat 500, but of course they added a turbo to the Abarth. Later they actually did add a turbo to what was the originally naturally aspirated engine. Then it became the turbo, but the Abarth still made more horsepower than the turbo. Anyway, if that's confusing enough. Nice to get out on a curvy road. So anyway, the Fiat 500. So if you're not aware, Fiat is an Italian company, kind of the big Italian automaker. They make cars for normal people, unlike the other Italian automakers that you might be familiar with, Ferrari, Lamborghini. I'm sure there's more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but Fiat's kind of the big one. So Fiat wants to be a global automaker. We're talking in the recent past here, they merged with Chrysler, which already owned Chrysler, Dodge, Plymouth, a number of American brands, and so becomes Fiat Chrysler Automotive. So don't know exactly when that happened. I believe it was around the 2008 recession. So before this, in 2004, Fiat is thinking about bringing back the 500. The 500 is their little city car. It was a classic, kind of like the Mini Cooper of Italy, basically. Something that people really loved and was really iconic. And they're like, we're going to bring it back. We're going to make a new version because, of course, during that time period, that's the popular thing to do, right? I mean, we think of Ford Mustang coming back 2005, going retro styling. That was a second gear corner and I was in third gear. Anyway, so bringing back retro cars. So Fiat is like, we're going to bring back the city car. It's going to be styled after the original 500. We're going to call it the 500. So it's pre-2004. Fiat is coming out with this concept car called the 3+1, and they're like, here's what we want to do. We want to make a small car, but we want to make it so that 4 people could use it if they had to. And most of the time, 4 people aren't going to use it, but maybe 3 adults and an occasional 4th, or a 4th person being a child. And so they take modern materials and they make the passenger side further forward than the driver's side. So they're saying, hey, let's let the front passenger scoot forward so that a tall person, like an adult, could sit behind them. The driver can sit a little bit further back because we need more stuff for the driver, pedals and steering wheel and gauges and all that. But behind the driver, we can fit, either a child or a smaller adult, or, just for occasional use. So the idea is 3 adults plus 1 adult or child. So that's what they came out with this concept car, the 3+1, the 3+1. It was styled after the original 500, which is, obviously something else in Italian, but we're calling it the 500 because we're speaking English. And it was kind of a hit. People liked it. So 2007 rolls around, the new Fiat 500 comes out in Europe. In America, we didn't see the 500 until, it was 2010. It came out in 2010 as a 2011 model year. the original Fiat 500 for North America. And then this guy came out in 2011 as a 2012 model, the Fiat 500 Abarth, which has the 1.4 liter MultiAir turbocharged engine making 160 horsepower. For those of you keeping track, the 100 horsepower per liter bar is hard to cross. A lot of technical challenges to get more than 100 horsepower out of a single liter of displacement in your engine. But the Fiat 500 Abarth does that, 160 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque out of a 1.4 liter engine. And you'll notice before I called it a MultiAir engine, and I didn't know what that was until I learned about it. Oh, this is a great road. This is a great road. MultiAir. So, a traditional small displacement engine, actually traditional small engines, like meaning not something that's a V8 or V6, traditional inline 4 engines from the modern era are usually a dual overhead cam setup. So they have two cams that sit on top of the engine. One cam runs the intake valves and the other cam runs the exhaust valves. Now, lots of companies have done variable valve timing. Might be familiar with VTEC from Honda or IVVT, I think that's Toyota's. And what that allows them to do is that allows them to, without getting too technical, optimize how the engine breathes. If we're going to go a little bit more technical, basically you can either optimize your valve timing, your cam profile, the thing that opens and closes the valves is the cam. You can optimize that for either efficiency or power, and that's usually at a specific engine speed too. So there's a lot of things that change as the engine speeds up and slows down, so forth and so on. So this is engineering for you. I'm an engineer, by the way, so this is fun to me, but engineering is always compromising because you can never make it perfect everywhere. You always have to make it as good as you can everywhere, and especially the places where you think it's going to be most used. So for an engine, you can either optimize it for fun, high-speed driving at high RPMs, or you can optimize it for fuel efficiency on the highway, or so forth and so on. So you got to decide what you're trying to do so that you can make it the best for that situation. So anyway, all that to say, normally when you're building a camshaft, you can optimize it for a certain thing, and then if you have variable valve timing, you get a little bit of wiggle room where you can still have good optimization, pretty close to the point that you're trying to make your ideal point, but it's kind of limited. So what MultiAir does is it improves on that even more, and the way that does that is it still has a camshaft for the exhaust. So it's actually a single overhead cam that actually drives directly the exhaust valves, but it indirectly drives the intake valves as well, except between the cam and the actual intake valve is basically some oil and a solenoid. If you don't know what a solenoid is, think of it as an on-off switch. So basically, when the switch is in the default position, the cam drives the valve just like normal, just like a normal engine. So it's driving the exhaust valves, it's driving the intake valves. However, when you switch that solenoid, it actually disconnects the intake valves from the camshaft. You say, now why would you want to do that? That seems, you need your valves to open and close and everything. Well, they can basically now open the valves at the appropriate time with the camshaft, but at any time during the cycle, you can close the valve. So basically what MultiAir does and this is their marketing thing, is that on a cylinder by cylinder basis, so there's 4 cylinders on the engine, and a stroke by stroke basis, that means every time or every other time the engine turns over, they can adjust how that valve is opening, specifically the intake valves. There's 2 of them per cylinder. They can adjust how both of those intake valves are opening every time they open, and in every cylinder separately, because they have all these solenoids that act like switches. So basically what this allows you to do is actually a couple things. One, because you can control this so precisely, you can control the amount of air that enters the cylinders. Normally, you have a throttle that does that, but with the MultiAir system, you don't need a throttle because you can close the valves anytime you want. And even at idle, you need them to open a little bit, so like a throttle is never completely closed. But what happens when you have a throttle is that the engine's still spinning and it's trying to suck air, but the throttle's restricting it. Whereas when you use the valves, it's still doing the same thing, but it's much more efficient. So there's these things called pumping losses. When the engine's trying to suck air in, but the throttle is stopping it, it's basically wasting energy. And so MultiAir significantly reduces those pumping losses, so you get better efficiency. There's also other things you can do. I'm not going to dive into all the details of MultiAir, but it's really neat. You can they can actually open the valves kind of like twice, which is like unheard of. I was actually really impressed by this technology when I read about it. This is like not a thing that a lot of people do. I don't know which way to go here. Let's go this way. This is not something that other engines can do, so I was quite impressed. And I'll be honest, I've never owned a Chrysler Jeep product before. I honestly hadn't thought too highly of them, and yet this is like pretty high-tech engine technology that they have, and it's been used in Fiat, it's been used in Dodge products, been used in Jeep products. So these MultiAir engines are really quite impressive. The neat thing about MultiAir too is the engines, at least for the North American ones, are built in Michigan. This particular car was assembled in Mexico. You can tell that by the VIN. They start with a 3, and you'll find that most small cars sold in America are assembled in Mexico, just because it seems like there's really very small profit margins on these guys, and so all the big automakers, if you know, some of them Ford doesn't even sell small cars anymore, but when they did, they were built in Mexico. It made it a little less expensive. So, but the engine was built in America, shipped to Mexico, and installed in the car. Interestingly enough, even the Fiat 500 itself, you'd think that because it's an Italian car, it was built in Italy, but no, Italy outsourced their 500 production to Poland, where it was, I assume, less expensive for them. So it seems to be a challenge to build small cars in this day and age. It's much more profitable for automakers to build large, high profit margin cars than small cars for the everyman, so to speak. And when we get on nice smooth pavement, this car drives really nice. There is a bit of road noise when you're on a rough road, but when you get on some nice new asphalt, it is very nice to drive. So let's talk a little bit more about this specific car. This is a 2012 model. I believe it was purchased in California, based on the Carfax. It's been a West Coast car its whole life, but pretty soon after it moved to Washington. In a future episode, I'll go over some of the documentation that I found in the car. It won't be too long, but still getting used to the clutch as well. I haven't quite finessed it. This car does require revving it up a little bit. That's one good thing I forgot to mention about the sport mode. is that it really makes it easier to start going from a stop, as well as heel toe. Sport mode is great for that because it allows you to blip the throttle and get that quick response, whereas in normal mode, really not something you can do easily. So anyway, this particular one, 2012 model, sold in California, spent most of its life in Washington, which is good because, well, I haven't looked under it yet. That's also another future video. I will assume that there's not going to be a lot of rust. I haven't seen any rust anywhere else on the car. There's definitely some like green algae growing in around the hatch on the trunk. That's pretty common for the Pacific Northwest if the car is left outside. A little bit of rust around the sunroof as well, outside the sealed area. Again, not too surprising for a place where it rains a lot, especially Washington. But this car stickered for $25,500, which actually doesn't seem too bad. I mean, that was almost 10 years ago now. It very possibly could have been sold in 2011, which would have been 10 years ago now. So I guess there is some inflation coming into play there, but $25,000 isn't too bad. I believe the base price was $22,500, and there were some options on this car. One of these being these red leather bucket seats. Those were an option. That was actually the most expensive option, $1,000 for those. The other option was the safety and convenience package. The main thing there was automatic climate controls, which again work. A lot of people say you should get the manual climate controls because they're, idiot proof. It's just a knob that directly controls everything, but I haven't had any problem with the automatic climate controls. I guess my only small gripe with it is that when you turn the heat on, it's not smart enough to not start blowing immediately when you start up the car. So it blows cold air right when you start up the car. But it's just like other old auto climate controls. In my Tacoma, it's smart enough to wait and turn up the heater, and I don't know if it's a time delay or if it checks to see if the engine's warm, but it generally doesn't start blowing until the air is actually slightly warm, so that's kind of nice. But this guy doesn't do that. Another option, which unfortunately can be removed from the car, was right here. There was a little TomTom navigation unit that sat in there, so there's no other color or touch screens in here. The very first years, up until the 2015 model year, was a break where they made some serious improvements across the entire North American Fiat 500 range. But up until that time, it was a monochrome screen here, monochrome stereo here, and no color touchscreen of any kind. But you could slot a little navigation dongle, so to speak, right here in the dash, and that was your infotainment navigation system. So that was another option. Other than that, that's pretty much all the options. Oh, and the sunroof, which I'm very glad they got the sunroof as an option. I do like the sunroof. It's huge, actually. Really covers the whole thing. Unfortunately, there's no way to completely block it off. You just get this, I don't know if you can see it, but you just get this little sun shade, but you can still see through. The cool thing about that is you can have the sun shade closed while the sunroof is open, which you can't do with a traditional sunshade. But the downside is you never really can completely block the sun out of the top, which to me is fine. I live in a temperate place. It's not the desert or anything, but if I lived in Southern California or Florida, that would be a huge drawback, and I would definitely be getting something to cover the glass with so it didn't cook the car every time I left it, or even while I'm driving it. Interestingly enough, the North American Fiat 500s, all of them had a number of changes from the European model, and I'm not an auto guru per se. I don't work in the industry. So maybe that's totally standard for a lot of things to be changed, but I'm talking about like adding more structural members, completely different climate control system for the, I guess, higher demands of North American customers. The convertible also got further structural reinforcements compared to the other models, a bigger gas tank, which this thing has a 10.5 gallon gas tank, which in the normal model, I assume gets you pretty far, but even at, you have to get 30 miles per gallon to get 300 miles out of a gas tank in this thing. And in this car, I don't actually know what my mileage is going to be yet. I've yet to fill up the tank more than once, which you need to calculate it, but basically, you're not getting a lot of range even out of a 10.5 gallon tank. So it must just be that the smaller distances in Europe it must be a demand of the North American market to have a bigger gas tank to go longer distances. This thing is a great little momentum car. That's what I love about turbo cars on curvy roads, is that as you come out of that corner, if you're in the right gear, that turbo starts kicking in, and you feel, I think, more acceleration, or at least it feels, whatever the sounds or anything, it feels like you get more acceleration compared to a naturally aspirated car, which just kind of, yeah, it builds, but like a Miata, the build isn't as strong. It's more of a, we're going, whereas this guy is, oh, you want to go? Whee! Oh yeah, need to get a little Italian tune-up going, especially with the new oil change. This car doesn't have any snaps or crackles built in, like some more modern cars, specifically thinking of Veloster N. But every once in a while, if you get on the throttle and then get on the brakes, you'll get a pop or something out the back. It's kind of fun. Well, other than random driving tidbits, that's really all I have on the history of the new Fiat 500 in America and the Fiat 500 Abarth. As I mentioned previously, 2019 was the last model year for the Fiat 500 in America. It's kind of interesting. The Fiat thought that they were going to be coming back to America in a big way when they came back in 2010, 2011 with the 500, but it was just poor timing, unfortunately. As we see now, the big thing has been trucks and off-roaders and SUVs. Small cars just haven't, while there was a small resurgence there, they really haven't captured the American market in any meaningful way, and if anything, they've become less and less common, as well as manual transmissions, just really going the way of the dodo overall, which is a shame. I bought my truck was my first automatic transmission. It just seemed to make more sense in a truck. While the Tacoma does have a manual option, I mean, the automatic is just so much easier for off-roading, and especially when the wife wants to drive it, she doesn't love driving manual. So we ended up getting an automatic in the truck. That was my first automatic vehicle, but I just love the involvement of driving the manual, and I still haven't gotten this one dialed in. Still trying to figure out exactly when to shift down to second versus when to stay in third on this guy. Second and third are going to be your back road gears for sure. I mean, I don't know how fast third goes, but fast enough. Anyway, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Wheels and Things. I'm really enjoying this car, really getting to know it. I'm saving my in-depth deep dive here's all the details about the car video until I've had a little bit more time with the car, because I keep discovering things about it, and nothing huge, but little things that, again, that's the point of this channel. You wouldn't know unless you owned or spent significant amount of time with the car. And I think I'm 3 weeks to a month into ownership and still learning stuff about it. So hope you have a good day. Thanks for checking in.